Hello. My name is Ardelia Shaw. And my sister, Seraphine Vaughn, slapped me 20 times in open court while the entire family watched and no one stopped her. She didn't know I was her new chief of police. She didn't know the same courtroom where I bled would be the one where I signed her termination. But this isn't just a story about revenge. It's about what happens when you're erased slowly, deliberately, by people who smile in family photos but silence your name behind closed doors. They stole my identity, burned my mother's will, lied about my mental health. And for decades I stayed quiet. Until I didn't. What kind of woman keeps every document they try to erase, and then builds her power with it? What happens when the outcast daughter writes the final chapter? You want to know what justice looks like when it wears your last name? Let me show you. It was supposed to be just another hearing. I walked into the courthouse that morning like I had walked into hundreds before, quietly, with my head down, the smell of old wood and polished marble filling the air. The morning light from the high windows hit the benches like it was spotlighting the guilty, not the innocent. My sister, Seraphine, stood across the aisle, surrounded by lawyers and relatives who used to pretend they were neutral. I didn't wear my badge that day. I didn't even wear my uniform. Just a plain gray suit, one that didn't invite attention. To them, I was just the youngest daughter who never made it big, the one who traded fancy dinners for night shifts at the police department. I could already feel Seraphine's eyes slicing through me before I even sat down. She hated that I showed up. "Why are you here?" she asked, loud enough for the clerk to look up from his files. Her voice carried that southern charm soaked in venom. "It's a public hearing," I said. "I have the right to be here." Her smirk was small but sharp. "Always hiding behind rights, aren't you? Must be hard living like a cop with no one left to arrest but yourself." The judge hadn't even entered yet. People were still settling in, whispering about property disputes, inheritance, things that don't matter when the people you're fighting with share your blood. When she stepped closer, I could smell her perfume, expensive, sweet, suffocating. I turned my head slightly, refusing to meet her eyes. That's when her hand came across my face. The first slap sounded like someone cracking open a book. The second one silenced the room. By the fifth, I stopped counting. Somewhere between the 10th and the 20th, I realized she wasn't just hitting me. She was erasing every moment she ever felt small beside me. Every Christmas she didn't get the attention she thought she deserved. Every time our mother called my name before hers. The sting burned down my neck, and the taste of blood hit my tongue. But I didn't move. I didn't lift a hand. The bailiff froze. My father looked at his shoes. My niece, Narina, lowered her head as if she'd just been told to pretend this wasn't happening. When the last slap landed, there was nothing left but the echo of her breathing and the trembling sound of my papers hitting the floor. I bent down slowly, picked up each page one by one, careful not to smear the ink with blood from my nose. I felt the paper tremble between my fingers, but my face didn't. The woman I used to be would have screamed, begged for someone to stop her. That woman was gone. "Feel better now?" I asked softly, just loud enough for her to hear. Seraphine's chest heaved. Her lipstick was perfect, not a single smudge. "You always wanted to ruin this family," she hissed. "You don't get to play the victim here." I wiped the corner of my mouth with a tissue from my sleeve and looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in years. I never even had a place in it. The clerk whispered to someone near the bench, but no one came between us. Maybe they were afraid of the spectacle, maybe they were afraid of her. Everyone in Savannah knew Seraphine Vaughn, the woman who could charm city officials with a smile and destroy reputations with a rumor. When I turned toward the reflective panel near the judge's bench, I saw myself, hair out of place, red mark across my face, eyes steady. There was blood dripping onto my badge holder, the one the courthouse gave visitors. The tag read guest. A guest in my own family's courtroom. A visitor in a place where my last name didn't mean safety but shame. The irony didn't hurt as much as the truth did. I pressed the tissue against my nose until the bleeding slowed, breathing through my mouth to stop the metallic taste from taking over. My throat tightened, but I refused to let a single tear fall. Not here. Not for her. The bailiff finally found his courage. "Ma'am, please, this is not appropriate." But Seraphine turned to him and smiled. "It's all right. We're family. Just a little misunderstanding." The word family hit me harder than any slap could. I gathered my papers, straightened them, and nodded at the bailiff. She's right, I said. It's just family business. Then I walked out. The hallway outside was colder than the courtroom. The echo of my heels on the marble floor was the only sound. My reflection followed me in every polished surface, same face, same bloodline, same endless cycle of silence. A few reporters loitered near the entrance. One of them looked up, eyes wide, recognizing me. Chief Shaw? What happened in there? I didn't answer. I wasn't the chief today. Today I was just the youngest daughter who learned that silence can be louder than any scream. Outside, the morning light was too bright. I sat on the courthouse steps, the tissue crumpled in my hand, the scent of Seraphine's perfume still clinging to my skin like a bruise that wouldn't fade. A few pigeons scattered as I exhaled slowly, letting my mind drift backward, to the dinners where my chair was missing, the birthdays where my name was left off the cake, the phone calls that never came. I'd always told myself that family fights were private things. That's what our mother used to say when the yelling got too loud behind closed doors, don't let the neighbors hear. But now everyone had heard. I stared at the courthouse dome gleaming in the sun. The same building where I'd spent years seeking justice for strangers. Yet, when it came to my own blood, there was no law, no fairness, just hierarchy and humiliation. I touched the faint swelling on my cheek and thought of my mother. She would have told me to forgive. She always did. But forgiveness without accountability is just another way of keeping quiet, and I was done with that. A man in a navy suit approached me cautiously. He worked at the clerk's office. I recognized his face. Ms. Shaw, he said gently. Do you need medical assistance? I can call someone. I shook my head. No, thank you. Just a little reminder. He hesitated, then nodded and walked away. The sound of traffic hummed in the distance, the kind of normal noise that almost felt out of place after what had just happened. I sat there until my pulse slowed, until the red haze behind my eyes turned clear again. For a brief moment, I almost stood to leave. I could have gone home, washed the blood off, filed another mental note under things I'll never forget. But then something inside me stopped me cold, a memory of a document. A piece of paper Seraphine had burned years ago, thinking no one noticed. The will. I stood up, clutching my papers close, and looked back at the courthouse doors. She thought she had erased every trace of me from our family story. She was wrong. I walked toward my car, feeling the weight of every stare from passers-by. Savannah was small enough that news like this would travel fast. By dinner, everyone would know that the Vaughn sisters had turned the courthouse into a battleground. But what no one knew, what no one could guess, was that the woman who walked out bleeding this morning was the same woman who'd soon decide Seraphine's fate. As I reached the car, I caught my reflection again in the window glass. My cheek was still red, but my eyes had changed. They weren't just angry. They were clear. Calculating. I started the engine, took one long breath, and whispered to myself, this ends when I say it does. The wheels rolled forward, the courthouse fading in the rearview mirror. I didn't know yet how deep the lies went, or how far I'd have to go to expose them. All I knew was that I'd been silent for too long. I could have walked away that day. But then I remembered the document she thought she burned. The drive home from the courthouse was long enough for my thoughts to circle back to what Seraphine thought she'd erased. The road blurred in the late morning light as the memory unfolded. It wasn't the first time I'd watched her destroy something that belonged to both of us. 3 months before the hearing, just a day after our mother's funeral, I had stood in the same position, silent, watching her reduce our mother's handwriting to ashes. The air that afternoon still smelled like lilies from the funeral service. The house was too quiet, that awkward quiet that comes after everyone has left with casseroles and condolences. I remember sitting in my car for a while before going in, hands on the steering wheel, trying to decide whether I was ready to see them again. My father's truck was parked crooked on the gravel, Seraphine's BMW shining like it owned the driveway. Through the open windows I could hear the faint clinking of glasses, laughter too light for the day after burying a mother. I pushed the front door open. Hello? Lawton, my father, appeared from the kitchen with a tumbler in his hand. Ardelia, you should have called first, he said, like I was some unexpected guest instead of his daughter. We're handling some private matters. Private matters. I knew what that meant. The will. I just wanted to sit with everyone, I said. We should be together right now. Seraphine's voice floated from the living room. It's family only, Artie. You understand. Her tone carried that polite cruelty she mastered over the years. I walked in anyway. The room still looked the same as it did when Mama was alive, heavy curtains, framed portraits, the smell of lemon polish, but there was a chill that didn't belong. Seraphine stood by the fireplace, her manicured hand holding a stack of papers. Her face didn't show grief, it showed ownership. "What are you doing?" I asked. She smiled without looking at me. "Cleaning up old business. Mama's will was outdated. I'm just making sure things are in order." When she tossed the first page into the fire, I saw the golden ribbon that used to wrap it. Mama had sealed that envelope herself. I recognized her handwriting, the careful curves of my name written across the front. "Stop." The word came out quieter than I intended. Seraphine turned. The orange glow lit her face, made her look almost ethereal. "You had your own life, didn't you? You didn't need what she left behind." "She trusted you," I said. She tilted her head. "And she trusted you to be reasonable." The flames ate the paper faster than I could move. The scent of burning parchment filled the air, sharp and final. My father stood behind her, not saying a word. His silence was worse than the crackle of fire. He poured himself another drink. I felt like a stranger standing in my own house. My throat tightened, but I kept my voice even. "You can lie to everyone else, but I know what you just burned." Seraphine shrugged, her expression soft like she was humoring a child. "It's outdated anyway. Lawyers will rewrite everything. That's how these things go." The conversation ended there because I walked out before my anger could spill. I stood on the porch for a long while, breathing in the humid Georgia air, pretending the tears on my face were just sweat. The sun dipped lower, and the smell of smoke drifted outside with me. I promised myself that day I wouldn't forget what I'd seen. Weeks later, we gathered again, this time for a church fundraiser in Mama's memory. It was supposed to be a night of remembrance, of family unity, but those are just words people use to dress up hypocrisy. The sanctuary lights made everything glow gold, and everyone looked too polished for mourning. Lawton took the stage to thank everyone for their donations. "We couldn't do this without the dedication of my eldest daughter, Seraphine," he said. Applause filled the room. "She's the one keeping our family legacy strong." A woman from the congregation leaned over to me and whispered, "You must be so proud of her." I smiled because it was easier than explaining the truth. Then someone from the crowd called out, "And what about your other daughter?" My father's pause lasted just long enough to sting. "Ardelia? She's working with the local police. Nothing big, but we're proud of her too." Laughter rippled through the pews. Not cruel, just dismissive. That kind of laughter hurts more, it pretends to be harmless. I sat through the speeches and the music, pretending to focus on the stained glass windows while the words replayed in my head. Nothing big. To him, my career meant nothing more than a side job, something temporary until I grew up and joined the family business. After the fundraiser ended, I walked to the parking lot, heels clicking on the concrete, the humid night pressing down like a heavy blanket. The sound of cicadas filled the silence. I could still hear my father's voice in my head, light and effortless, telling a room full of people that I wasn't important. At home, I opened my old leather notebook, the one Mama gave me when I joined the force, and started writing. Dates, events, names. It was something I learned from years on the job. Documentation was power. If they wanted to erase me, I'd make sure my existence was written in ink somewhere. The next morning, I returned to the family house. Lawton was in his recliner watching cable news, still in his robe. "Morning," I said, trying to sound casual. He didn't look up. "You're still hung up on yesterday?" "Just checking on some papers Mama kept here," I replied. "Seraphine already handled all that." "I know," I said, walking toward the fireplace. The faint scent of burned paper still lingered. I knelt down and brushed my hand through the cold ashes. Something rough brushed against my fingertips. A corner of an envelope, half burned but still there. The edges were blackened, but part of the gold ribbon survived, a stubborn piece of beauty refusing to die. I held it up to the light, and for a second, I could almost smell Mama's perfume, that mix of rose and soap she always wore. I slipped the fragment into my notebook. That single act felt like defiance. They might have burned the will, but I still had proof that it existed. Later that day, Seraphine called. "You've been snooping," she said without preamble. "I came by to see Dad," I said. "Don't play games with me. You're still clinging to things that don't matter." "Like honesty?" She laughed. Like the past. You always were sentimental. That's why you'll never survive in our world. Our world? I asked quietly. The one that moves on, she said, and hung up. I stood there holding the phone, listening to the dial tone fade. Outside, the sky was the color of tarnished silver, and rain started to fall, soft, steady, familiar. The kind of rain that cleanses nothing. I walked back to my car, opened the notebook again, and pressed the half-burned envelope between 2 pages. I didn't know yet what I'd do with it, but I knew it wasn't over. That night I sat by my kitchen window, coffee growing cold beside me, replaying every word she'd said. I thought about the kind of people who could destroy evidence of love so easily, who could call it business and sleep fine afterward. And I realized something simple, maybe family loyalty was just another currency, and I'd been bankrupt a long time ago. I closed the notebook, turned off the light, and let the darkness settle around me. The ashes might have cooled, but the fire in me hadn't. Inside that scorched corner, I saw one thing no flame could erase, my mother's signature. The piece of envelope felt brittle in my hands, its edges blackened and delicate as dried leaves. My mother's handwriting, faint but still there, curled across the surviving corner like a whisper from another time. Her name, her script, her calm. It pulled me backward, faster than I wanted, to another letter, another promise that had gone up in flames long before this one. The smell of smoke from that fireplace in the family house mixed in my memory with the smell of my mother's kitchen 25 years earlier. 1999, I was 17, standing barefoot on the cool tile floor, my graduation dress still hanging over the chair. The night hummed with the low buzz of summer insects outside and the hum of our refrigerator that always needed defrosting. That was the night the envelope came. A thick, cream-colored one with a federal emblem printed in deep blue on the corner. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Youth Leadership Program. My full name was typed in neat black letters across the front, Miss Ardelia Shaw. I remember running my thumb over the seal, my pulse quickening. It wasn't just a scholarship. It was freedom, a way out. A full ride to a leadership program that could have opened every door I'd ever dreamed of walking through. I could see myself beyond the narrow streets of Savannah, beyond the family's shadow. I brought it straight to my father. He sat at the kitchen table, cigarette burning in the ashtray, reading the evening paper as if the world stopped existing beyond the newsprint. "Daddy," I said, holding the letter like a trophy. "They accepted me. The FBI program I told you about, full scholarship, living expenses, everything." He folded the paper, looked at the envelope, and for a brief second, I thought I saw pride in his eyes. Then he sighed, heavy and slow, like someone burdened by something they didn't want to say. He opened the letter, scanned the first few lines, and then closed it again. "You're not doing this," he said. I thought I'd heard wrong. "What do you mean I'm not doing this? It's an honor program. Only 10 students in the state got picked." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "No daughter of mine is going to carry a gun or answer to Washington. You're not a soldier, and you don't need to prove yourself to strangers." I stood there with my heart pounding, unable to move. My mother was standing near the sink, drying dishes, her shoulders tight beneath her robe. She didn't turn around. "Daddy, this isn't about guns," I said quietly. "It's about service." "About..." He cut me off. "It's about respect, Ardelia. This family's name means something in this town, and I won't have you dragging it through government business." Seraphine walked in then, heels clicking against the tile even though she had no reason to be dressed like she was headed for a party. She was 22, already running errands for the family company, already talking like she owned half of Savannah. "What's going on?" she asked, pretending innocence. "Your sister thinks she's joining the bureau," my father said. Seraphine laughed. "Really? That's adorable." I shot her a glare. "It's not adorable, it's serious. I got in, Sarah. I earned it." She leaned against the counter, arms folded. "You always want to make everything about yourself. Mom says family first. Maybe you should listen to her for once." Mama didn't look up. She just kept drying the same plate, over and over, as if she could rub the tension off it. I said, "You don't even understand what this means. It's not about leaving. It's about you thinking you're better than us," Seraphine said, smiling that careful smile she used when she wanted to cut someone without showing the knife. My father folded the letter neatly, like he was putting it to rest. "That's enough. I'll handle the response." I'll handle it, I said quickly, but he was already reaching for his pen. He signed his name on a slip of paper that came with the letter, parental acknowledgement, and checked the box marked decline offer. It took me a moment to realize what he'd done. Daddy, you can't. I just did, he said. This discussion is over. My throat went dry. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. I looked at my mother, begging her silently to say something, to stand between us the way she used to when Seraphine and I fought over the last piece of cornbread. She didn't. She looked tired, older than her 40 years. Lawton, she murmured, maybe she should. He slammed his hand on the table. No. That's final. Seraphine touched my shoulder lightly, mock sympathy dripping from her voice. It's for your own good, Artie. Some people aren't built for the spotlight. That night I lay awake in my room, the sound of crickets outside mocking the silence inside me. The letter sat on my desk, the corner slightly bent from where my father had gripped it. I traced the embossed seal with my finger until I couldn't see it anymore through my tears. The next morning, when I came downstairs, the envelope was gone. Mama was sitting at the table with her coffee, eyes red but calm. I didn't ask where it went. I already knew. Years later, when I joined the police academy on my own terms, I found a small envelope tucked into one of Mama's recipe books. It wasn't the original scholarship letter, but inside was a note written in her looping cursive. You were born to serve something bigger than pride. Don't let anyone's fear make you smaller. I kept that note folded inside my wallet for years, until the corners wore thin. Now, decades later, sitting in my apartment with that half-burned will beside me, the memory felt like a reopened wound that never quite healed. I pulled open the drawer where I kept old keepsakes, things too painful to throw away. At the bottom, wrapped in a faded cloth, was a small badge-shaped pin. It wasn't official, just a mock badge the FBI program had sent me with the acceptance package. My name was engraved in tiny letters that were almost rubbed off. I held it against the light. 2 artifacts, 2 betrayals, the burned will and the rejected badge. Both symbols of a family that couldn't stand to see me stand on my own. I set them side by side on the table. The metallic reflection of the pin caught the faint glow of the lamp, shining over the ash mark left on the envelope's edge. They didn't match, but they belonged together. I thought about what that night had taught me. That being right didn't mean you'd be believed. That wanting more than what you were given could make you the enemy in your own house. That love, in our family, always came with conditions. The clock ticked toward midnight. Outside, the cicadas had gone quiet. I poured myself a glass of water, stared at my reflection in the window. The girl who'd once wanted to make her family proud was long gone. What replaced her was someone who'd learned to survive in silence. But silence was a habit, not destiny. I turned on my laptop, the screen light washing my face pale in the dark. My fingers hovered over the keys. Maybe it was time to stop pretending family loyalty meant justice. Maybe it was time to believe in something else, like the law I'd spent my life upholding for everyone but myself. I typed into the search bar, Chatham County Internal Investigations, Whistleblower Reporting Portal. The words looked almost too official, too serious for a woman sitting alone with old ashes and an imitation badge. I took a deep breath. The sound of the key clicking as I pressed enter felt like the start of something irreversible. If I couldn't belong in my own family, I'd find justice somewhere else. After I sent that report to the Internal Investigation Portal, I sat staring at my laptop until the screen dimmed. The cursor blinked like a pulse, quiet and steady. I wasn't sure if I had just set something in motion or if I'd crossed a line I could never return from. The air inside my apartment was still. Outside, the city kept humming its late-night rhythm, cars rolling past, someone arguing 2 floors down, the faint cry of a train somewhere beyond the river. By morning, my inbox held an email stamped confidential in bold. The department had opened a new case, anonymous whistleblower report concerning suspicious financial activity at a real estate firm named Vaughn Estates. My stomach tightened. That name had belonged to my sister long before it belonged to her company. I poured a second cup of coffee I didn't need and read the message again. The request for lead review sat waiting for my response. I told myself it was coincidence, that plenty of companies carried the Vaughn name. Still, I felt my pulse quicken as I hit accept. An hour later, I was sitting in the glass-walled conference room at Chatham County Internal Affairs. The light in there always felt sterile, too clean for the kind of dirt we handled. My commanding officer, Captain Morales, leaned against the table, tapping a folder. "You'll take point on this," he said. "Anonymous source claims internal embezzlement and possible shell accounts overseas. Keep it sealed until we confirm." "Understood," I said, though the word felt heavier than usual. Morales noticed the hesitation. "You good, Shaw? You look like you swallowed something sour." I forced a calm smile. "Just a long night, sir. I'll handle it." Back at my desk, I opened the secure system and typed the company's name. The logo appeared, sleek gold lettering on a black background. Beneath it, founded by Seraphine Vaughn. My heart thudded once, hard enough to feel in my throat. So it wasn't coincidence. The deeper I went into the records, the more familiar it all felt. The property deeds, the zoning contracts, the partnerships with city officials, it was our family business dressed in corporate polish. Every document carried Seraphine's signature, but the numbers beneath them told a different story. Large sums moved through holding accounts, sometimes twice in a week, sometimes to destinations that didn't exist on any legitimate list. I minimized the window, took a slow breath, then reopened it. No mistake. This was my sister's empire, built on charm and intimidation, now creaking under its own lies. I requested anonymity on the report, citing conflict of interest and professional distance. Morales frowned but signed off. "You're sure you want to stay on this?" he asked. "It's routine," I said evenly. "If something turns up, I'll hand it off." He gave me a look that said he didn't believe a word of that. "One misstep, and this becomes personal. You know how that ends." I met his eyes. "It already is." That night, I stayed at the office long after everyone left. The hum of the fluorescent lights was the only sound besides the tapping of my keyboard. I traced bank transactions like threads, one leading to another until the pattern emerged, a web that circled back to the same name again and again. Narina Vaughn. My niece. A college student with no steady income. The records showed wire transfers in her name to offshore accounts registered in the Cayman Islands. Not small sums either, hundreds of thousands at a time. I sat back in my chair, rubbing my temples. Seraphine had always used people like stepping stones, but this was different. This was her own daughter. Part of me wanted to shut the file and walk away. Pretend I hadn't seen it. Pretend I was still the younger sister who kept family secrets out of habit. But another part of me, the part that had bled on the courthouse floor, refused. I began compiling evidence, piece by piece. The more I worked, the more I felt the old guilt fade, replaced by something steadier, colder. At midnight, I drove past the Vaughn Estates building downtown. It sat lit up like a beacon, glass walls gleaming against the night sky. I parked across the street in my unmarked cruiser, engine off, and watched. A few employees filtered out, laughing, their heels clicking against the pavement. Through the glass doors, I could see Seraphine's office on the top floor, lights still burning. I remembered standing in that same building years ago when it was new. She'd given me a tour, called it Our Legacy. I'd believed her then, believed that family meant something. Now, watching the glow of her window, all I could see was the cost of silence, the empire I helped protect by never speaking up. The city was quiet. Somewhere nearby, a streetlight flickered. I checked my watch, 1:07 a.m. I reached into my bag, pulled out a small device, a digital tracker tied to our secure database. I'd used it on corrupt contractors before. Never imagined I'd use it on Bled. The company's network password wasn't hard to guess. Seraphine reused birthdays, vanity was predictable. I logged into a public Wi-Fi hotspot across the street, accessed the employee portal, and uploaded the tracking script. The screen blinked once, then settled. For a moment, I hesitated. What was I doing? This wasn't procedure. This was personal. But then I thought of Mama's letter, of my father's silence, of every time someone told me, family first, right before they shut me out. I pressed enter. Lines of code scrolled, connecting to the system. The tracker installed smoothly, invisible, ready to flag any new movement of funds or new client accounts. I leaned back, listening to the quiet hum of the laptop fan. My reflection looked back at me in the glass, older, sharper, not the girl who'd begged for permission to serve something bigger than herself. "I'm not her anymore," I whispered. For the first time in years, I felt steady. There was no thrill, no satisfaction. Just clarity. If Seraphine had turned our family into a business of deceit, then I'd treat her like any other criminal. As I sat there, headlights flashed across the windshield. A security guard patrolled the lot, oblivious to me. The air smelled faintly of rain. I thought about how strange it was, the peace that comes when you finally stop asking for approval. Before leaving, I checked the system again. Nothing yet. The tracker was waiting, patient as truth. I drove home through empty streets. The river shimmered under the moonlight, dark and wide, the same river that bordered our childhood backyard. I used to think it sounded comforting. Tonight it sounded like warning. When I got home, I poured a glass of water, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my laptop again. The screen flickered to life. A new notification flashed in the corner. Alert, transaction flagged. My chest tightened. I clicked it open. The details filled the screen, a new client account created under my name, Ardelia Shaw, using my social security number and date of birth. I stared at it until the numbers blurred. The same sister who stole my future had just stolen my identity. Again. When I discovered that new account under my name, I thought nothing could shock me more. I was wrong. The following week, whispers began creeping through the precinct like humidity before a storm, silent, sticky, and inescapable. It started with side glances, the kind people exchange when they think you're too busy to notice. Then came the murmurs. "Isn't she under a lot of stress?" someone said near the coffee machine. "I heard she's been seeing someone for therapy." "Like the intense kind," another voice replied. "Guess the badge finally got too heavy," came the chuckle that followed. At first, I ignored them. Gossip is like mold, it only grows in darkness. But as days passed, the rumors grew teeth. A sergeant from another unit hesitated to assign me a case. A younger officer avoided eye contact. I could almost hear their thoughts forming before they spoke, unstable, emotional, cracking. One afternoon, Detective Palmer, someone I'd trained myself, pulled me aside in the hallway. His tone carried that soft pity people use when they think you're fragile. "Chief," he said, "just between us you should know people are talking. About you. About your family. Something about your sister making jokes at a city luncheon." I smiled like it didn't sting. "What kind of jokes?" He shifted, lowering his voice. "She said, and I quote, 'My sister's always been a little fragile. You know how cops crack after a few years?'" People laughed. They thought it was harmless. Harmless. That word can do more damage than any bullet. I thanked him, went back to my office, and shut the door. The blinds were half drawn, light cutting through in thin stripes across my desk. On top of the pile sat the file from Vaughn Estates. I stared at the company logo, wondering how far Seraphine planned to go. When theft didn't silence me, she'd chosen humiliation. She'd always known where to aim, the reputation, not the heart. I didn't lash out. I learned long ago that when someone paints you as irrational, the smartest thing you can do is stay calm enough to scare them. That evening, I began documenting everything. Each comment I overheard, each sideways glance, each headline with Seraphine's smiling face and her philanthropic ventures. I kept recordings, screenshots, timestamps. I titled the folder on my private drive when they tried to bury me. For a few nights, sleep came in fragments. The air felt heavy even in my own apartment. The cicadas outside buzzed like static in my mind. I'd lie awake replaying my father's voice from years earlier, the one that crept in whenever I doubted myself. "Maybe you're just too sensitive, Ardelia," he'd said once when Seraphine lied and I'd tried to call her out. "You imagine slights where there aren't any." For a long time, I believed him. It's easier to think you're broken than to admit the people you love are capable of cruelty. On Thursday, I went down to the training wing to observe an interrogation workshop. A two-way mirror separated me from the officers practicing inside. I caught my own reflection in the glass, hair tied back, eyes sharp but tired. I looked at myself for a long moment and whispered, "I'm not broken. I see clearer than all of them." It wasn't defiance, it was truth. By Friday, the rumors had stretched beyond the department. A local gossip site ran a piece about the Shaw family drama, citing an unnamed business insider. The article mentioned Vaughn Estates, my supposed erratic behavior, and even quoted a line attributed to Seraphine, "I love my sister, but she's been struggling. Some people just can't handle pressure." I nearly laughed reading it. She wasn't just controlling the narrative, she was writing the whole script. I could have gone to Morales, reported a defamation complaint right away, but I knew better. Cops eat their own when the water gets bloody. Instead, I gathered more proof. A colleague from the IT division owed me a favor, so he quietly pulled server logs showing an email sent from Vaughn Estates' public relations office to that same gossip blog. Attached was a press packet, my name included, along with carefully chosen photos that made me look weary, older, detached. That's when I understood, she wanted me off balance before the investigation hit. Discredit the witness before the trial begins. It was brilliant in a cruel way, and for a moment, I almost admired her nerve. Saturday evening, I sat in my car outside the Riverfront Hotel where her charity gala was being set up. Strings of lights blinked across the terrace, laughter spilling out from the catering staff inside. I wasn't on the guest list, but I didn't need to be. The department had assigned officers for event security, and I quietly added my name to the rotation. I walked through the lobby later that night in plain clothes, checking exits, radio clipped to my belt. From the balcony above, I could see her, perfect hair, perfect smile, entertaining donors like she'd never thrown a punch or forged a document in her life. She spotted me across the room and, for a second, her charm faltered. Just a flicker. She turned back to her guests quickly, pretending not to know me. I stood near the bar, keeping my posture easy, the way we're trained when surveillance requires patience. My presence was enough to remind her that no rumor could rewrite reality. A reporter passed by, recognizing me. "Chief Shaw. Are you here for security or family support?" "Both," I said, smiling, and walked away before he could press further. Halfway through the evening, Seraphine took the stage to thank the sponsors. Her voice carried across the hall, smooth, confident. "At Vaughn Estates, we believe in rebuilding communities. My family taught me that integrity begins at home." I almost laughed out loud. Instead, I hit record on my phone, the small red light glowing faintly in my pocket. Let her words hang themselves later. When the event ended, she approached me near the service hallway, where the noise faded into distant music. Her perfume was the same as always, sweet, calculated. "I didn't know you were working tonight," she said softly. "I didn't know you were moonlighting as a psychologist," I replied. Her smile tightened. "You shouldn't take everything so personally." "Funny," I said, "that's exactly what people say before they lie." She leaned closer. "You can't fight me on this, Artie. People believe what they want to believe. And right now, they want to believe you're unstable. It makes them comfortable." "You sound proud." "I sound realistic," she said. "You've always been too emotional to play the long game." I looked her straight in the eye. "Then watch how long I can play." I walked away before she could answer. Back home, I poured a drink I didn't finish and sat at my desk. The city outside was still alive, horns in the distance, wind moving through the magnolia trees. I opened the file I'd been building all week. Every rumor. Every fake quote. Every transaction she'd touched. I attached the server logs, the audio clip from her speech, and the screen capture of the blog email metadata. Then I wrote the subject line, "Formal report, defamation and financial misconduct, subject, Seraphine Vaughn." Before sending, I hesitated for a heartbeat. Once it left my inbox, there would be no going back. But then I remembered the courthouse, the slaps, the laughter, the badge that read guest. I clicked send. If she wanted to drag my name through the mud, I'd make sure it stuck to her hands. The certified letter had just left my hand when I received the call from the bank. The timing was almost poetic, if poison were poetic. I stood outside the post office, watching the clerk wheel the outgoing bin toward the back while I listened to the woman on the other end speak with the soft professionalism of someone used to delivering bad news. "Miss Shaw, this is Maria Givens with Atlantic Crest Bank. We just need to confirm a few details on the $250,000 commercial loan application you signed last week with Vaughn Estates." My spine stiffened. I hadn't applied for any loan, let alone one that big. "I'm sorry," I said, forcing my voice to stay even. "Can you repeat the name associated with the loan?" She didn't miss a beat. "Ardelia Shaw. Applied jointly through Vaughn Estates, approved last Tuesday. We've mailed your copy of the terms, but we needed to confirm your insurance binder." I closed my eyes and took a breath deep enough to drown the scream clawing its way up my throat. "Maria," I said carefully, "I didn't apply for that loan. Someone is using my name without my consent." A pause. Paper shuffled in the background. "Well, that's unusual. The application includes your full legal name, SSN, and an e-signature tied to a personal email. Send me everything, I said. Email, hard copies, all of it. And flagged the account for fraud review immediately. I hung up, walked back to my car, and sat behind the wheel staring at the steering column. My fingers gripped it so tightly, I left crescent-shaped indentations in the leather. I wasn't just being slandered anymore. She had weaponized my name, my records, my identity. Again. Later that afternoon, I drove to the law office handling the loan documents. I didn't call ahead. I didn't need an appointment. I'd been to this building before, back when I used to sit across from Jonas Pruitt and pretend that love would someday be enough. The receptionist looked up with the kind of politeness reserved for police officers out of uniform. Can I help you? Is Jonas in? I asked. Tell him it's Ardelia Shaw. She blinked twice, then picked up the phone. A few seconds later, she motioned me through. His office hadn't changed. Same dark wood paneling, same bookshelf filled with hardcovers no one actually reads, same framed law school diploma angled just so. Jonas looked up from behind his desk with a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. Artie, he said, leaning back like we were old friends. To what do I owe this visit? I dropped the bank printout on his desk. You tell me. He glanced at the paper, then at me. This is routine. Vaughn Estates has dozens of joint signers on file. I'm not one of them, I said. And you know that. He hesitated, then gave a small shrug. You're listed as a silent partner. Seraphine assured us the paperwork was in order. You were copied on the emails. I didn't authorize anything. I didn't receive anything. And if you had any ethics left, you would have verified it directly with me. He raised a brow, his tone shifting into something more defensive. I was acting on information given by a client. I had no reason to doubt her. No reason? I leaned forward, lowering my voice just enough to be deadly. You dated me for 2 years. You had access to my social security number, my financial records, my life, and now you're facilitating fraud under my name? His smugness faltered. It wasn't personal. That's what makes it worse, I said. You didn't even think twice. For a long beat, we stared at each other. Him behind his desk, me standing with all the weight of my badge, even if I wasn't wearing it. You always said you hated my badge, I said softly. Now you're about to find out what it can do. I left before he could respond. I didn't need to hear the excuses. I knew them already. Back at the precinct, I submitted the conflict of interest notice and formally removed myself from the lead role on the Vaughn Estates investigation. But that didn't mean I let go. Behind the scenes, I began prepping 2 parallel cases, a civil claim for identity theft and defamation, and a criminal referral for financial misconduct. I pulled city zoning contracts, campaign donations, and property deeds, all pointing back to Seraphine's name. I sent discreet requests for records from offshore banking affiliates and asked 2 trusted colleagues to begin background tracing under sealed clearance. By the end of the week, I had enough to start a storm. And still, part of me hesitated. Because for most of my life, I waited for something else, for my sister to say sorry, for my father to acknowledge me, for someone in that family to say, you belong. But I was done waiting. I didn't want their love anymore. I wanted justice. That Friday evening, after hours, I drove to the corporate office downtown. The building was quiet, parking lot mostly empty except for the night guard's old Buick. I climbed the steps with a certified envelope in hand, my heels clicking in the kind of rhythm that used to make me nervous before job interviews. At the front desk, the receptionist looked up, startled. The office is closed, ma'am. I'm here to drop off a legal summons, I said. For Miss Seraphine Vaughn. She hesitated. I can place it in her mailbox. No, I replied. It needs to be logged and time-stamped. She nodded, buzzed me in, and led me to a delivery logbook. I wrote the date, time, and title in clean cursive. Summons, deposition for fraud investigation. As I handed it over, I imagined Seraphine's face when she opened it. That moment when her polished world would shift just slightly out of place. On the way out, I passed the glass lobby display showing Seraphine in a press photo, hand extended, smile wide. The placard beneath read, Rebuilding Savannah, one legacy at a time. I paused, looked at her image, and whispered, let's see how well it holds up in court. I didn't go home after I dropped off the summons. I sat in my car for nearly an hour, parked just outside the hotel where Seraphine's charity gala was already in full swing. The place glowed like a stage set, draped in fairy lights and flanked with luxury SUVs. Laughter rolled out in bursts from the grand entrance. It was all so rehearsed. I looked down at my phone. A new email notification had just popped up. From the county's HR department, final appointment confirmation, chief of police. The timing almost made me laugh. Tomorrow, everyone in that ballroom would know who I really was. But tonight, I was just part of the background noise, a security officer walking the floor, checking exits, quietly observing. I'd added my name to the coverage list myself. No one questioned it. I wore a dark pantsuit instead of my uniform, kept my badge tucked out of sight, and carried a discreet shoulder mic. The gala was listed as a high-visibility, low-risk event, just enough to merit presence, not enough to draw eyes. Inside, the ballroom was crowded. Politicians, business partners, society wives with names that still held sway in this city. I nodded politely as I passed clusters of people, careful not to linger. It didn't take long to spot her. Seraphine stood near the stage, radiant in a deep green gown, her signature silver pendant resting neatly over her collarbone. She smiled wide, shook hands, posed for pictures like Savannah's own queen of virtue. She didn't glance toward the exits, she never did. That was my role in the family, the one who always watched, never got seen. The lights dimmed slightly, and the music softened. An MC took the stage, clearing his throat as a signal for attention. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the visionary behind tonight's event, our very own Seraphine Vaughn. Applause swelled, more out of obligation than enthusiasm. Seraphine took the microphone, her smile growing just slightly more polished. Thank you all for being here, she began. At Vaughn Estates, we believe in more than just real estate. We believe in rebuilding communities. In trust. In legacy. I leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, and watched the screen behind her light up with a presentation. My presentation. Every diagram, every timeline, every redevelopment zone proposal, I had written them 3 years ago as part of a proposal for urban reinvestment. I'd pitched it at a public forum, submitted it to the city, and then nothing. It had vanished. And now here it was, dressed in gold and corporate fonts, rebranded under her name. The fury that flared up in me wasn't loud. It was quiet, cold, controlled. The kind that lives deep in the bones and doesn't scream, it plans. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Not openly, just a small flick of my thumb into the voice memos app, screen dimmed. Her voice rang clear. This initiative is something I've poured my heart into, she said. We're proud to lead this city forward. And yes, this vision started with me. A simple idea on a napkin, now a full-fledged transformation. A napkin. That woman couldn't design a traffic cone on her own. I scanned the crowd. At a table near the front, I spotted Lawton, our father. He clapped along like a trained dog, beaming with pride. Across from him sat Narina, her posture a little too stiff, her smile not quite right. She saw me from across the room. We didn't acknowledge each other. We didn't need to. When the slideshow reached the budget allocations, I nearly choked. She'd used numbers I'd flagged years ago as inconsistent. The same numbers she'd told me were internal placeholders. She knew exactly what she was doing. I slid my phone back into my pocket and looked at the seats. Each table had personalized nameplates in gold script. Mr. Lawton Shaw. Councilwoman Janine Carter. Dr. Preston Avery. Not one with my name. No seat. No welcome. No recognition. I stepped away from the wall and walked toward the staff entrance behind the curtains. No one stopped me. I wasn't a guest. I wasn't a speaker. I was just someone who'd once thought being family meant something. The speech ended, applause erupted, and Seraphine stepped off stage. She moved toward the mingling crowd, champagne glass now in hand. Her gaze swept across the room, calculated and precise. And then she saw me. Her eyes locked with mine. I didn't look away. Not this time. I held her stare like a challenge, unblinking, unmoved. For a split second, her jaw tightened. That was all I needed. She turned back to the donors, plastering her smile in place. But her hand trembled slightly as she raised her glass. Later that night, I walked through the hotel service hallway toward the staff elevator. Before reaching the doors, I ducked into a quiet corner near the catering prep area. I pulled out my phone again and opened my draft email folder. Everything she said, everything she displayed, had once existed in emails I'd written. Those emails were gone now. Deleted from the city server. Scrubbed clean. But I had kept the drafts. Backups. Printouts. Hard copies. Because part of me always knew. I pulled out the folder from my bag, copies of original proposals, time-stamped notes, my own hand-drawn maps. I looked at the envelope I had labeled, insurance. Then, another ping. A second email from the county HR office, your promotion becomes public record tomorrow at 9 a.m. I smiled. Let her enjoy tonight. Let her think she won. Tomorrow, she'd find out just how powerful the sister she erased had become. The sun hadn't fully risen when I stood in front of the mirror, fastening the 3 stars to my collar. For a long moment, I just looked at myself, uniform crisp, hair neatly pulled back, eyes steady. Not proud, not bitter. Ready. I hadn't worn this particular uniform since my promotion was confirmed, only in private. I didn't want the headlines or the attention that came with the title. But this morning wasn't about titles. It was about presence. A knock came on the door just as I picked up my badge case. Deputy Marshal stood outside, punctual as ever. "Ma'am," he said with a nod. "Transport is ready." "Thank you. Let's go." The ride to the courthouse was quiet, except for the occasional squawk from the police radio. As we pulled up to the curb, I caught sight of the reporters already gathering outside. They hadn't come for me, yet. Most assumed this morning's hearing was another routine civil motion in the tangled legal mess surrounding Vaughn Estates. I stepped out of the car. My boots hit the pavement with a finality that echoed far beyond the sidewalk. The whispers began the moment I entered the lobby. A few courthouse staff who'd known me for years stood still as I passed, their expressions shifting from casual to uncertain. One of them, Debbie, from reception, opened her mouth to say something, then seemed to think better of it. No one greeted me with applause. But no one looked away, either. When I entered the courtroom, it felt smaller than it had last time. That day, I stood here bleeding with a visitor badge clipped to my blazer. Today, I walked down the aisle wearing the weight of justice on my shoulders. Not borrowed authority. Earned. The judge hadn't arrived yet. Lawyers milled near the front, shuffling papers and whispering. Seraphine was already seated at the defendant's table, dressed in deep navy, her hair pulled back in a sleek bun that matched her usual polished armor. She didn't see me at first. Then I sat down, directly beside the lead prosecutor. The moment she saw me, her eyes flickered. No fear. Just confusion. Then recognition. Then, the beginning of unraveling. The bailiff stood. "All rise." Everyone stood. The judge entered, adjusted his glasses, and looked around the room. Then his eyes landed on me. "This proceeding has been updated," he said, voice calm. "Ms. Ardelia Shaw is now present in her capacity as Chief of Police for Chatham County." There it was. Spoken aloud. On the record. Seraphine turned her head sharply toward her lawyer, who leaned in and whispered something. Her mouth barely moved, but I saw it, a clench of the jaw, the twitch of one eyebrow. I stood. My voice came out clear. Not loud, but strong. "Your Honor, I've submitted a termination recommendation for Ms. Seraphine Vaughn, effective immediately. Accompanied by full documentation of financial misconduct, identity theft, and digital evidence of data tampering related to a public official." The courtroom didn't erupt. There was no gasp like in the movies. Just a heavy, dense silence, the kind that drops when everyone realizes the air has changed. I handed the prosecutor the folder I'd spent months building. It was thick, bound in red, stamped with the official insignia. Signed. Sealed. Stamped. The judge accepted it, eyes scanning the top page. Noted for the record. Behind me, I heard the rustle of papers. The cough of a nervous observer. The distant clicking of someone's pen stopping mid-note. My father was in the second row, his cane resting against the bench. He didn't look at me. His gaze was locked on Seraphine, unreadable. Narina sat 2 seats away, her posture curled inward, like she wanted to disappear. Malik sat beside her, still, quiet, but when I glanced his way, he met my eyes and gave the smallest, proudest nod. I turned back toward the judge and took a slow breath. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about reckoning. When the session adjourned, I didn't linger. I stood, gathered my notes, and walked to the back of the courtroom. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out something I'd kept longer than I should have, a plastic visitor badge. The same one from the day Seraphine had slapped me across the face in front of all these people. I placed it gently on the clerk's desk. A closing of a loop. By noon, I was back at police headquarters. The afternoon sun poured through the high windows as I sat behind the desk that now bore a plaque with my name and title. I reached for the pen that had been a gift from my academy mentor, Chief Johnson, now retired. He once told me, "You'll know a moment's real when your hand shakes before it moves." Mine didn't shake. I signed the dismissal order. Name, Seraphine Vaughn. Reason, violation of public trust. Abuse of authority. Familial exploitation. At the bottom, I wrote, Chief Ardelia Shaw. The ink dried fast. The words didn't blur. They stood firm on the page, just like I did. I leaned back in my chair and stared out the window, watching the city move as it always had. But something was different now. I wasn't invisible anymore. No one clapped. No one made speeches. But for the first time, I didn't need them to. She never saw me coming. The courtroom had emptied long before I made it back to my office. The buzz had faded from the phones. Reporters had stopped calling. Even Morales, who always had something to say, kept his distance. The silence was almost too clean. I sat behind my desk, not with a coffee or a pen in hand, but with a single manila envelope. It had been waiting for me all morning, propped neatly on my chair like a reminder. My name was scrawled across it in familiar handwriting, my mother's. The seal had already been broken, the legal team having validated the content days ago, but I hadn't opened it myself until now. I pulled out the folded papers inside, one typed, one handwritten. The typed sheet was a revised will, dated 2 years before her passing. It clearly named me as an equal heir. The handwritten note, though, that was what made my throat tighten. You are not invisible to me, Ardelia, it began. One day, you'll carry a name this family was too blind to honor. That doesn't make them evil. It makes them afraid. She signed it with her full name, Odessa Beatrice Shaw, like she did when she wanted her words to carry weight. I didn't cry. I thought I might. But what came instead was a kind of quiet release. I placed the letter back in the envelope and slid it into the drawer beside my badge. The two didn't feel so far apart anymore. Later that afternoon, I sat through a mandatory policy review meeting at headquarters. Boring. Repetitive. Necessary. My team ran through procedural updates while I sat at the edge of the table, nodding occasionally, but mostly listening. Letting the room breathe without needing to control it. That was new for me. During the last 10 minutes, my phone buzzed in my lap. A voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. I excused myself quietly and stepped into the hallway to listen. Hi. It's Narina. Her voice was softer than I remembered. I know I have no right to ask anything, but I needed to say thank you. For not staying silent like the rest of us. I'm sorry it took me so long. That was all she said. That was all she needed to say. I didn't call her back. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I saved the voicemail. That night, while Savannah settled into its usual southern quiet, distant dog barks, porch swings creaking, screen doors snapping shut, I pulled into the driveway of the house I once called home. The estate was dark. No one lived there anymore. Not since the investigation started. I unlocked the front door with a key that hadn't changed in 30 years and stepped inside. The scent was different now, less lemon polish, more dust and old air. I moved through the room slowly, my boots tapping softly against the hardwood. In the dining room, the table still stood as it had for decades. 10 chairs around it, each one heavy, carved, and stained with 1,000 family memories, some warm, most not. I pulled one out at the head of the table and sat down. The chair across from me, the one Seraphine had always claimed, sat empty. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my mother's letter. I placed it gently on that seat. No words. Just breath. Just presence. The chandelier above creaked slightly, disturbed by a shift in air, or maybe something else. I sat there until dusk turned to dark, until the light outside faded into the kind of deep blue that made shadows stretch long across the floor. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. There's a difference between being healed and being whole. I wasn't either. Not yet. But I was something I hadn't been in a very long time, at peace. When I stood, I didn't push the chair in. I let the letter sit. On the way out, I paused by the living room bookshelf. Tucked between two encyclopedias was the cedar box Mama used to keep old photos and heirlooms in. I lifted it gently, carried it to the kitchen, and opened it on the counter. Inside was a collection of things that no longer held weight: school certificates, pressed flowers, a brooch I once gave her for Mother's Day. I reached into my coat pocket and removed my chief badge. Polished. Solid. Earned. I laid it gently inside. Not forever. Just for tonight. It wasn't a trophy. It wasn't vengeance. It was a reminder. I hadn't won power. I had reclaimed my voice. The next morning, Malik's teacher sent me an email. She wanted to share an excerpt from a personal essay he'd written for his English class. It read, "My aunt taught me that family isn't just who shares your name. It's who shows up. Who protects your truth. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." I read it twice. Then a third time. Then I printed it and placed it inside my wallet, right next to Mama's letter. A week later, the district attorney filed formal charges against Seraphine for multiple counts of fraud and identity theft. Her indictment made the front page, but I didn't read it. I had cases to review. Reforms to push through. Officers to train. My father retreated quietly from public life. No one heard from him much. I didn't seek him out. Some doors, once closed, stay that way. In the months that followed, I spoke at a few community forums about public trust, departmental transparency, and the need to see the unseen. I didn't mention my family. I didn't need to. People knew. But not everyone asked about the trial. More often, they asked me what came after. What happens when the storm passes? And the truth is, justice gave me closure. But it's healing that gives me peace. Sometimes, justice doesn't come with cheers or applause, it comes in quiet, steady steps. This wasn't just a revenge story about a sister betrayed, it was about reclaiming your voice when others have tried to erase it. Have you ever been made to feel invisible by the very people who were supposed to love you most? What would you do if your silence was mistaken for weakness? Share your thoughts in the comments, your story might inspire someone else to speak up. And if this story moved you,